Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mahyam Dadati Swapadantikam. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute. Taptakanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriya Mancha Kalpadarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschyata Deshatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langayate Giram Yat Kripatamaham Vande Shri Gurum Dinatarinam Paramananda Madhavam Shri Chaitanya Ishwaram. So today's chapter is chapter 14, which is titled Gunatraya Vibhaga Yogaha. It's primarily focused on the three gunas and how these three gunas influence everything that we do. It also talks about what actually nourishes these three gunas, what causes them to grow and take a strong hold of you and your senses, your behavior, your attitude, your likes, your dislikes, etc. But before we do that, we'll just do a quick review of chapter 13. So chapter 13 was titled Kshetrajna Vibhaga Yoga. And Srila Prabhupada translates this title to be Nature, the Enjoyer, and Consciousness. And as we mentioned, this chapter is a little bit difficult to understand. And it begins with Arjuna's questions, 6 questions. What is Kshetra? What is Kshetrajna? What is Prakriti? What is Purusha? What is Jnana? And what is Jnana? And Krishna answers these questions. So what is Kshetra? Kshetra is this body that we occupy, this physical body. It's called the field. Who's operating this body? The knower of the body is operating this body. So Kshetrajna is the spirit soul. But there is one more knower of this body. So besides us knowing ourselves, there is also Paramatma residing within us. And therefore, there are 2 knowers of this body, the soul and the supersoul. What is Prakriti? Prakriti is material nature, depicted primarily as the influence of the 3 modes on the spirit soul. Purusha is the enjoyer. So there are 2 Purushas here. The original Purusha is actually Paramatma. It's Paramatma that enjoys creation. However, when the Jivatma comes under the influence of the 3 modes of material nature and Maya Devi, we begin to think that we are the enjoyer. So we misidentify ourselves as the primary enjoyer, and therefore we try to manipulate Mother Nature. We exploit Mother Nature for our own sense gratification. But the Lord is actually the only enjoyer. The energetic enjoys his energies. So jnana is knowledge. It also includes the process to acquire this knowledge. And what is jnana? Jnana is the object of knowledge. The object of knowledge is Krishna. So I was reading Srila Prabhupada's purports of chapters 7, 8, and 9 yesterday, as I was reading the 3 chapters. And in one of the chapters, I don't recall which chapter, I think it's chapter 8, that Srila Prabhupada writes that true knowledge includes knowledge about the matter and knowledge about the spirit. In our educational system, we are only covering knowledge of matter. And therefore, knowledge of matter by itself is considered incomplete. So real knowledge, the topmost knowledge, includes the study of both matter and spirit. Matter includes the 24 elements. But if you are actually Sankhya Yoga, now this last 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita is also called Sankhya Yoga. And the word Sankhya means to count, or it's an analytical study. So Sankhya Yoga actually is analytical study of matter. There is the Sankhya Yoga philosophy school. That school only studies matter. And therefore, a study of matter, while it's good to understand what is matter, without knowing that it is spirit that is operating on matter, that knowledge is incomplete. So we also talked about 3 elements again that Lord Krishna comes back to, which is Paramatma, Prakriti, and this Jivatma. And how can one analyze Prakriti, analyze the nature of self, and analyze the nature of God? All 3 topics are difficult. It's not easy to understand, which is understanding self, understanding Prakriti, and understanding the Supreme Lord. So it takes time and patience for us to understand these topics. And as I was mentioning in last class, sometimes you just have to wait for revelations, and you have to just wait for answers to questions that you have. But genuinely, these questions do get resolved as you stick to the process. And in this process, the Lord also talks about the 20 items of knowledge, which are in effect the 20 qualities also of a devotee. And he says anything outside this 20 is considered ignorance, in Krishna's words. Out of which we looked at qualities beginning with humility. Krishna begins that particular shloka with humility, amanitvam. And then he talks about pridelessness, adambitvam. Then non-violence, tolerance, simplicity. He talks about the importance of accepting a spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of sense objects, giving up false ego, understanding that this cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease is actually entrapping us, developing detachment from things, including family, which is freedom from relationships and entanglements. So like this, the 20 items of knowledge. Humility, we discussed, is really learning to think of oneself less rather than thinking less of oneself. This particular saying was put forth by His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami Maharaj, where he says that humility does not mean that you're not good enough. That I don't have this quality, I don't have that quality. That is not really humility. Humility is actually not thinking of oneself at all and thinking more of others. So in that regard, we talked about Akbar's test for Birbal, where he tells him, here are two parallel lines, reduce the length of one without cutting the length of either. So the best way to reduce the length of one without cutting the length of either of those parallel lines is to actually increase one of those lines. So humility means glorifying other Vaishnavas. And you learn humility by glorifying others. In the beginning, it may appear to be artificial. Even if you don't know the Vaishnava, whatever little you may know about them, when you glorify them, it may sound a little artificial because you genuinely don't know them personally. So how do you glorify someone that you don't know? But in Vaishnava culture, still, we practice glorifying even someone that we don't know. Whatever we can glorify them based on whatever little that we know actually helps you become more humble. And I used to think, how is that possible? Just vocally praising someone, how does that make you feel a little bit more humble? I actually had to practice glorifying Vaishnavas before I understood what it really meant to be humble. Because when you continue to glorify Vaishnavas, you will genuinely recognize that these devotees have all sacrificed their lives in some small way or in big ways to please their Guru Maharaj, to please Srila Prabhupada, and to please Lord Krishna. Our human nature is to only identify the faults of others. So when one can overlook another person's faults, even though in the initial neophyte stages, you are quite good at noticing other people's faults, including Vaishnavas. So you have to really practice how not to recognize the wrongs that other people do. And one way of doing that is to glorify the other person. It actually works. I can talk from personal experience. So you could ask, why should I follow anybody? But Krishna says in this particular shloka that you must accept a guru. You must learn to serve a guru. Otherwise, how will you acquire qualities of submissiveness? How will you acquire the qualities of being inquisitive to learn more? Unless you are tied to guru. And it just so happened that this morning, I get these emails on quotes of Srila Prabhupada. And I just want to read something that I had posted in the WhatsApp group. So in this, I'll just share this with you so you can see it yourself. This is the mood that Prabhupada had in all his life. As a man cannot separate his life from his body, a disciple cannot separate the order of the spiritual master from his life. So this is the importance of taking on Guru, because then you become attached to his instructions. One becomes attached to the Acharya's instructions. Prabhupada was so humble that he would say, I really don't know Krishna. In spite of the fact that Prabhupada had established this wonderful institution, established 108 temples at a very advanced age, from the age of 70 to 81. And Prabhupada would still say, I don't know Krishna, I only know my spiritual master's instructions. And therefore Prabhupada was very attached to his spiritual master's true instructions to him. Similarly, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, there is this pastime of Kaliya. Kaliya has a lot of pride and a gigantic, oversized ego. You know, one of the purports to one of the shlokas in Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada writes that in one of the shlokas, Arjuna calls Krishna Madhusudana. Madhu is the name of a demon. And Krishna had vanquished or destroyed this demon. And Prabhupada uses the analogy to say that the reason Arjuna was calling Krishna Madhusudana in the middle 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita is that Arjuna recognized that he was haunted by the demons of doubt, which is, what is it that he should really do? And he was requesting the Lord to kill his doubts once and for all, to eliminate his doubts so that he could be firm in his conviction. So similarly, in this Kaliya pastime, where the Lord dances on the hoods of Kaliya to subdue him, and when Kaliya is about to give up his life and he thinks, I'm gone, this is the end of me. At that time, all of his wives, called the Naga Patnis, offer beautiful prayers to the Lord. I think around 12 or 16 verses, I don't recollect. So Naga Patnis are devotees of the Lord. So they tell the Lord, it's going to be very difficult for us to live without our husband. He's completely with faults. He's full of faults. He's too proud. He's got a big ego. But at the same time, we worship him as our husband. Please spare him his life. They ask Lord Krishna to spare their husband's life. And they say, if you kill him, we will be forced to live with other snakes. You may think killing one demon is good, but there may be other demons around that we have to contend with. So better a known demon than an unknown demon, right? So at that time, when they offer the prayers, they ask the Lord to please spare the life of their husband, Kaliya. And the way they end their prayers is by saying, we've made our request, my dear Lord, but at the end of the day, you are the controller and you are the decider. So we have very humbly put forth our request before you to spare the life of our husband, Kaliya. But you do as per your desire. So this is the attitude of the devotees, that even when difficulties come their way, they try not to trouble the Lord. They accept it as his special mercy. There's another pastime about how you're completely dependent on Guru. His Divine Grace Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who's the spiritual master of Srila Prabhupada, he had many disciples. And one day, one of his disciples wanted to meet him. And one of his other senior disciples stopped him saying, why do you want to trouble the spiritual master? He asked him, what do you want? He said, I want to get permission to purchase some soap. And the senior disciple chastised him. He told, you really want to trouble your spiritual master for such a silly little question, whether you should buy soap? And but he insisted, no, I want to take permission from my spiritual master. So he goes and sees Bhaktisiddhanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, and he asked his guru's permission, can I use some money to purchase some soap? And at that time, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj tells the other disciple who tried to stop him from going to meet his spiritual master. He says, actually, it's a wonderful quality he's displaying, that he's so completely dependent on his spiritual master that he's come to seek my permission before he uses Lakshmi for any particular purpose. So just like that, the mood should be always to be deferential to the spiritual master, to always seek his protection and permission. So humility is one aspect. Pride, which humility, of course, if you acquire, will lead to pridelessness, subjugation of your own ego. So in Vrindavan, when the Goswamis were residing in Vrindavan, the 6 Goswamis are the disciples of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So that time there was a very famous Vaishnava scholar by the name of Rupa Narayan to talk about the difference between pride and pridelessness, an example of this. So Rupa Goswami was a great scholar, very well versed in the scriptures, and a disciple of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So this Rupa Narayan had this habit of traveling everywhere and defeating scholars. So he thought, okay, so let me challenge Rupa Goswami, collect one more certificate, notch up another victory in debates. Some people are so proud of their little bit of knowledge. They engage in competition to get certificates. So anyway, so this Rupa Narayan comes and he approaches Rupa Goswami and tells him, I want to debate you. Rupa Goswami responds by saying, I'll give you a certificate that you're more knowledgeable than me. Because Rupa Goswami understood the mood of this particular gentleman, Rupa Narayan. His interest was not to debate, his interest was to defeat another personality. So very gently he tells him, you are better than me. If you want, I will give you a certificate. I'll write and say you're better than me. And so he does. So he takes a certificate from Rupa Goswami saying that Rupa Narayan is a great scholar and unsurpassed, without a debate. However, Jiva Goswami, who is the nephew of Rupa Goswami and also the disciple of Rupa Goswami, when he hears that his spiritual master had given a certificate stating that Rupa Narayan was superior to him in Shastras, he gets very upset. So he quietly approaches Rupa Narayan and challenges him to a debate. And he soundly defeats this Rupa Narayan. He does this without telling his spiritual master, Rupa Goswami. So after being defeated, Rupa Narayan goes back to Rupa Goswami, falls at his feet, begs for his forgiveness and says, oh, if your student is so brilliant, I can only imagine how knowledgeable and brilliant you would be. So he begs for forgiveness and he says, you're a great Vaishnava. You've got such a wonderful disciple in Jiva Goswami. When Rupa Goswami hears this, he becomes very upset with his disciple and nephew. And he banishes his nephew and he says, I don't want to see you anymore. He's very harsh with his disciple. He says, go away from Vrindavan. You don't deserve to stay in Vrindavan. So, of course, Jiva Goswami follows the instruction of the spiritual master. And he goes away. Because his spiritual master had chastised him. Rupa Goswami's mood was that this Rupa Narayan was actually a pretender. He is theoretically knowledgeable about the Shastra, but he has no realization. Because the more you learn about the Shastra, the more you become humble, because you realize how much you don't know. And therefore, a Vaishnava does not get into unnecessary debates or arguments with people who have not really realized Shastra, because it's a waste of time. So that was Rupa Goswami's mood. It's not that he could not have defeated Rupa Narayan. He definitely could have. But the mood was, if somebody is so proud of the knowledge that they have, you shouldn't waste time debating them. You're better off continuing with your seva, Vaishnava seva, Krishna seva, Guru seva. So he chastises Jiva Goswami by saying, why did you stoop to his level? I sent him away for a purpose so that we don't waste time with such characters. But what did you do by defeating him? You wasted time. Instead of you serving your spiritual master, you engaged yourself in this particular activity. Jiva Goswami is also a pure devotee. He's a great self-realized soul. Now, let's look at the same situation from the perspective of Jiva Goswami. So what was Jiva Goswami's mood? His mood was that my spiritual master was defeated. He wanted to establish the supremacy of his spiritual master. That is the role of a disciple. If anybody directly or indirectly critiques the spiritual master, a disciple is supposed to stand up for the spiritual master. We shouldn't be silent. If somebody is attacking your spiritual master or claiming that they are better than your spiritual master, you are supposed to defend your spiritual master. So his mood was, my spiritual master is the greatest. So who is this nonsensical person who thinks who's more knowledgeable than my spiritual master? I have to prove to him that my spiritual master knows the Vedic scriptures. And therefore, his mood was, I need to protect the reputation of my spiritual master. So the mood of the guru was different. The mood of the disciple was different. Is any one of them wrong? No, both of them are right, actually, in this particular case. So who comes to the rescue then, because Jiva Goswami is banished? So Sanatana Goswami goes and finds Jiva Goswami, who's somewhere in a cave. He's not eating, he's not sleeping. He's lost a lot of weight. He looks very emaciated. And he goes and begs Rupa Goswami to forgive his disciple and to accept him back. So, in the case of a difficulty between guru and disciple, another senior Vaishnava can step in and rescue the situation, which is what Sanatana Goswami does. He convinces Rupa Goswami that what he had done was wrong, and actually Rupa Goswami himself was exhibiting a quality that was not a Vaishnava quality. So Sanatana Goswami is the older brother of Rupa Goswami. So he convinces his brother to accept his nephew back as his disciple and to call him back. And that's what Rupa Goswami does. He calls back his nephew. So again, this is about how pride can take on different forms and shapes. So the object of our knowledge is Paramatma. So the ultimate enjoyer is actually Lord Krishna, nobody else. Yes. So this was the summary of chapter 13. The questions that Arjuna asks, the responses that Krishna gives. And then the Lord talks about the 20 items of knowledge. He talks about Prakriti, Purusha, and Jivatma. How the Lord pervades everything. The difference between the soul and the super soul. The qualities of a jiva. The qualities of a realized soul. How does this realized soul get that jnana shakti? How do they get this enlightenment? And then what is their destination? So today's chapter is chapter 14, the 3 modes of material nature. Before we begin, let's offer our humble obeisances to His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So we are puppets in the hands of the 3 gunas. So how do we go beyond? This is what we're going to understand today. One is, how do these gunas actually influence us? And what is the Lord's instruction to us? So the Bhagavad Gita has 700 verses, of which 100 verses are dedicated to talking about these 3 gunas, the 3 modes of material nature. So 3 things influence us: Sattvagun, Rajagun, and Tamagun. Sattvagun is the mode of goodness. Rajagun is the mode of passion. And Tamogun is the mode of ignorance. The word guna means rope. These ropes bind us to the material world. It traps us. And these 3 ropes or gunas are so tightly intertwined, you cannot distinguish one from the other. So Krishna says in this particular chapter that our first goal is to elevate ourselves to the Sattvagun stage. So if we are predominantly under the influence of Tamagun, Krishna says, elevate yourself to Rajagun. If you're predominantly under the influence of Rajagun, Krishna says, elevate yourself to Sattvagun first. And then at the end of this chapter, Krishna then says that one must transcend even the Sattvagun to reach a state that is called the Vishuddha Sattva state, which is pure goodness. And ideally, to practice spirituality, one will arrive, we may start with the with the Sattva Gun, but it will lead us to the Shuddha Sattva state. In this Vishuddha Sattva state, what do? We offer everything to Krishna. And therefore, we don't suffer the consequences of our current or our past karmic reactions. So only when we come to this Vishuddha Sattva state, you can actually go back to the spiritual world. You can enter the spiritual world. That means that even if you are under the influence of Sattvagun, which is considered the mode of goodness, you still have to take birth again to benefit from all the good deeds that you have done. You have to take birth again. Now, you may take birth in the upper planetary systems to benefit. If you have deposited so many pious activities into your bank account, then Krishna wants to reward you for that. And that reward may be a more luxurious life, a much longer life in the upper planetary systems. So one day Srila Prabhupada was traveling by car, and he had his disciples with him in the car. And there was some traffic jam and some road repairs were going on. And he came across a board that said, road work ahead, temporary inconvenience, permanent improvement. So, you typically see these signs that says, we regret the inconvenience, road work is going on. So what this signboard says, it's a temporary thing. It's a temporary inconvenience so that you can have a better life. You have a permanent improvement. Prabhupada saw this sign and laughed. And he said, this material world actually is temporary improvements, permanent inconveniences. Whatever improvements we experience, or whatever, what can we call it? Comforts that we're trying to get ourselves, it's actually temporary. So what is permanent is that inconvenience will keep coming, and you'll keep addressing one inconvenience after another. It will never stop. So whatever improvements that you try to make in your life to make yourself comfortable is actually temporary. The inconveniences are actually permanent. So even living in the mode of goodness does not mean you are going to be happy, because happiness can only come in relationship with Krishna. So karma is defined by the acharyas as trying to satisfy yourself. Prema is defined as trying to satisfy Lord Krishna. So the word love applies only to Krishna. Anything else outside of Krishna is actually lust. So the difference between lust and love is defined as, lust is anything that we do to satisfy ourselves, our own senses. Love is to please Krishna. But we use the word love very easily in this material realm, and that is, as per Shastra, inaccurate. That is what we are calling love is actually lust. Love is exclusively meant for Krishna. Therefore, you can only find true happiness when you develop your relationship with Krishna. So we're going to go over the slides today. So the acronym for today is TRAP. And the single word summary for today is bar. There are 3 bars, which is represented by the 3 gunas. We said that when we enter this material cosmos, we are entering Prakriti, which is considered the prison cell. But the Lord is so merciful that he has accompanied us into this prison to help us get out of it. Although he himself has created this prison for us because of our intransigence, our disobedience, but he's more than willing to be your attorney and advocate for your release and help you through this process of getting out of this prison. So this prison is actually these 3 gunas. And Krishna is going to tell us in this chapter how these three gunas influence everything that we do. And how these three gunas are always competing with each other. And what are the different activities that we perform under the modes of these three gunas. And Krishna will conclude this chapter by saying how we can lead a pure life, which is really coming to the Shuddha Sattva stage. Sattvam sukhe sanjayati rajah karmani bharata jnanamavrityatuttamah pramade sanjayatyuta. O son of Bharata, the mode of goodness conditions one to happiness. Passion conditions one to fruitive action. And ignorance, covering one's knowledge, binds one to madness. Which means when you're searching for happiness, you're trying to get into the mode of goodness, because if you can't get into the mode of goodness, you will not find happiness on the material platform. How does the mode Rajaguna influence you? It makes you work. You're always chasing after something, some desire you want, some outcome you want, and therefore you're always chasing. What does ignorance do? It actually covers your knowledge. And Krishna is saying, ignorance is so bad that it makes you mad. It binds you to madness. So it's just a varying levels of consciousness between the three gunas. A varying level of self-awareness as a result of coming under the influence of these three gunas. Right? So consciousness is connected to your awareness. The more elevated your consciousness is, the more self-aware you are of your position. The highest level of self-awareness and complete understanding of consciousness is to know that you are just a servant of the Supreme Lord. And you'll never be the master, how much ever you may want to, you may desire to, or you may attempt to. That you can never be the master. You're only pretending. And Prabhupada uses this analogy. You know, sometimes children imitate their father or mother, right? Especially you will see girls trying to imitate their mother. They want to learn how to cook. But all they're doing is making a lot of noise with the empty vessels. They're not actually creating anything. But they think that they're creating something. They think they're creating a dish, just like their mother. So we, because of coming under the influence of Maya Devi, we actually think we are creating things. In reality, we are not the creator. We are not the enjoyer. We are not the controller. So we are playing make-believe. That is Maya. That is actually illusion. So these three modes, as we said, guna means rope. So these are very subtle influences on every aspect of ourselves, our behavior, our physical well-being, our emotional and mental health well-being is all influenced by these three gunas. So sometimes it forces us to act against our own good judgment. And you recall, Arjuna asks this question, what compels me to act against my better judgment in chapter 3? And Krishna says it's lust. Lust only, Arjuna. So Sattvagun means apparently peace of mind, less anxiety, happiness, some amount of satisfaction, some amount of feeling that you're in control of everything that's going on. Maybe you're practicing some spirituality here. Rajagun is depicted by constant activity, a restlessness to accomplish something or do something. Actually, even in spiritual life, you should be restless. Restless to follow the instructions of your spiritual master. But that's not Rajagun, that is Shuddha Sattva state. So I remember Amoglila Prabhu, when he had come to the temple, somebody asked a question at the end of his session. He asked, how can I overcome laziness? I want to practice bhakti, but I find that I am too lazy. And Amog Leela Prabhu answered that gentleman's question by saying, when you don't have an urgent purpose in life, you become lazy. So when you have an urgent purpose in life that you want to serve Krishna, you want to serve Guru, you want to serve the Vaishnavas, then you will not be lazy. You'll jump out of bed every day thinking, I need to satisfy my spiritual master. I need to please my spiritual master. So when you don't have a sense of purpose, you tend to be lazy. It means nothing inspires you. That means you don't have a strong sense of purpose. So what are these three modes and how do they influence you? So qualities that affect every aspect of our lives: our character, our behavior, our approach towards life. It impacts us at various levels: physical, mental, emotional. So these ropes are the three colors. There are the three primary colors, and you mix them up and you get various permutations and combinations. So not one size fits all. So even within Sattva Gun, you'll find different gradations of color. Same thing with Rajagun and Tamagun. So let's look at some examples. So let us say you like reading. So people in the mode of goodness would prefer to read non-fiction, maybe some motivational literature. People in the mode of passion are attracted to thriller novels and fiction. People under the mode of ignorance, what are they doing? They are reading objectionable content or consuming things from the website that really puts them further into the mode of ignorance. So typically, those who are in the mode of goodness take to professions like teaching or maybe agriculture. People in the mode of passion, for them, money is honey. They will chase anything as long as they can get more money without making other calculations on the spiritual side. It's just a material calculation. I want more money. What kind of work one may do in the mode of ignorance? Well, you may be selling alcohol, you may be selling drugs or other things that's really not beneficial for society on whole. What about time of the day? Who relishes which time of the day? People in the mode of goodness generally are awake early morning. They are most productive when they wake up early. People in the mode of passion, when the sun is in the mid of the sky at noon time, it activates your Rajogun. So this also aligns with the movement of the sun. So the peak of the sun, the hours of the time, the peak of the sun, that is considered very Rajasic. And of course, people in the mode of ignorance, they generally tend to be awake late night when everybody else is asleep. They're not able to go to sleep. They are engaged in some activity or the other, and they end up using the daytime to sleep. It's one of the reasons why in ISKCON, if we generally advise devotees not to accept jobs that force you to work during nighttime. It is not good for your body. It's not good for your consciousness. What about music? Well, soft music that doesn't disturb your consciousness is the taste of somebody under the Sattva Gun. Loud music that makes you very active. These could be considered music that you are attracted to if you are under the influence of Rajogun. And of course, one cannot call anything music where there is only shouting and screaming. in the record. There are, and then of course, objectionable language. This is all music under the mode of ignorance. So a good place to be if you want to be in the mode of goodness is surrounded by greenery, parks and forests. And of course, we are all living in our crazy city life, the jungle of modern life. So Prabhupada says anybody living in a city is under the influence of Rajagun, because cars are moving all the time, bikes are moving all the time, people are going somewhere. Any time of the day you step out on the road in Bangalore, it's always crowded. And you always wonder, where are these people going? And they are wondering, where are you going? It's always crowded. There's always a traffic jam. Something happening all the time. Even at nighttime, if you step out in Bangalore, you'll see so many taxis at nighttime. This is Rajagun, something always happening. A place that a person likes to hang out in if they are under the influence of Tamogun, pubs and nightclubs. So you can see a single person can some days enjoy hiking, but that same person at nighttime may go out and hang out in the nightclub. So that means all three modes are working on them constantly. So the modes are not like one straight lane in the highway that you're sticking to. Most of us are constantly changing lanes from this gun to that gun to that gun, and then we go back across this way. So you see how we are actually spoiling our life. There's no consistency in what we're trying to do. What about the foods? A person under the influence of Sattvagun is naturally attracted to wholesome, vegetarian foods that are actually nutritious, both for the body and the mind. People in the mode of Rajagun, this is Krishna saying this in this chapter. They like spicy food, they like sour foods, Krishna says. They like hot foods, pungent foods, which means very piping hot. You need to eat it very, very hot, right off the stove. And Krishna says, what about the foods that people under the influence of Tamogun are attracted to? Untouchable, rotten, decaying foods. So foods, non-vegetarian items would fall in this category, and also foods that are a day old, refrigerated foods. These Krishna calls all untouchable, rotten, and decaying. They influence your consciousness at a subtle level. So if you're constantly eating decaying, rotten food, then you can understand how you're constricting yourself in one particular guna. State of mind. Generally, you experience happiness and you feel you have some amount of knowledge that is helping you manage your lives very nicely. State of mind of a person under Rajagun, you're agitated, you're greedy, you're never satisfied. State of mind, Tamogun, you're lazy, you're dull, and you're not very keen on anything to do with spirituality. So these three modes, Krishna says the mode of goodness is that you are too self-satisfied to follow the dictation of the super soul. You're so happy, you're not able to hear Paramatma within you. You're doing things that pleases you, but you're not really paying attention to Paramatma. What Paramatma wants you to do, you're not recognizing that. So if you're in the mode of passion, your desires speak loudly, and you cannot also hear the voice of Paramatma within you. So of course, if you're in the mode of ignorance, what about hearing Paramatma? You can't even hear your own self. You don't understand yourself. So where are you going to learn about Paramatma at all? So let's look at some of the shlokas, because all of this has to do with gunas. It's a very interesting chapter, as I mentioned. Interesting to read Krishna's perspective on all of this. Let's see. So here, Krishna is talking about in Shloka 5, material nature consists of three modes: goodness, passion, and ignorance. When the eternal living entity comes in contact with nature, O mighty armed Arjuna, he becomes conditioned by these modes. O sinless one, the mode of goodness, being purer than the others, is illuminating, and it frees one from all sinful reactions, which means if you come to the mode of goodness, then obviously you're not committing any sinful activities, which means there is no papa. But at the same time, you are collecting a lot of punya points, which will cause you to take birth again. Those situated in that mode become conditioned by a sense of happiness and knowledge, which is what we saw in that slide just now. The mode of passion, Krishna is saying, is born of unlimited desires and longings, O son of Kunti. And because of this, the embodied living being is bound to material fruitive actions, which means you're committed to chasing things. O son of Bharata, know that the mode of darkness born of ignorance is the delusion of all embodied living entities. The result of this mode are madness, indolence, the word indolence means laziness, and sleep, which bind the conditioned soul. But in reality, in order for us to function, we actually need all three modes, isn't it? If we want to take rest, we need to come under the mode of tamogun, because without the influence of tamogun, we cannot sleep. Without the influence of rajagun, you may not wake up in the morning and get ready to do your activities. So all three gunas are in some way, shape, or form necessary for us to conduct our life. But predominantly, Krishna will say we should transcend these three gunas. O son of Bharata, the mode of goodness conditions one to happiness. Passion conditions one to fruitive action, and ignorance covering one's knowledge binds one to madness. And then Krishna is going to talk about the race for prominence, these three gunas competing with each other to dominate you. Sometimes the mode of goodness becomes prominent, defeating the modes of passion and ignorance, O son of Bharata. Sometimes the mode of passion defeats goodness and ignorance. And at other times, ignorance defeats goodness and passion. In this way, there is always competition for supremacy. So Krishna is saying, I want you to understand how these gunas operate. They are competing to dominate you. That means in reality, you have no control. The manifestation of the mode of goodness can be experienced when all the gates of the body are illuminated by knowledge. This knowledge is just to understand that you have to follow the prescribed duties of the Vedic scriptures. And therefore, when you're strictly adhering to the Vedic scriptures, your body is illuminated, which means you're only doing good things. You're not engaging in any sinful activity. But is that the goal of life? The goal of life is not just to engage in good activities forever. The goal of life is to transcend even the Vedic scriptures. The goal of life is to have a relationship with Krishna. So, O chief of the Bharatas, when there is an increase in the mode of passion, the symptoms of great attachment, fruitive activity, intense endeavor, an uncontrollable desire, and hankering develop. When there is an increase in the mode of ignorance, O son of Kuru, darkness, inertia, madness, and illusion are manifested. When one dies in the mode of goodness, he attains to the pure higher planets of the great sages. So which means you're not going into the spiritual world. You're very much in the material world. It's just you're going to have a better quality of life compared to the earthly planet. When one dies in the mode of passion, he takes birth among those engaged in fruitive activities, which means you will come back. You'll take birth again in the middle planetary systems where there is a lot of activity. When one dies in the mode of ignorance, he takes birth in the animal kingdom. So two things actually later on Krishna will say. The effect of dying under the influence, if you're predominantly under the influence of the mode of ignorance, either you have to take an animal body or you will go to the lower planetary systems. So two types of degradation. One is the degradation of the body. One is degradation of experience by going to the lower planetary systems. The result of pious action is pure and is said to be in the mode of goodness. But action done in the mode of passion results in misery. So when you're chasing things and you think you're going to find your happiness there, it actually doesn't result in happiness. You're actually miserable. An action performed in the mode of ignorance results in foolishness. From the mode of goodness, real knowledge develops, which means the springboard for you to practice spirituality is you must first come to the mode of goodness. From the mode of passion, greed develops. And from the mode of ignorance, develop foolishness, madness, and illusion. Those situated in the mode of goodness gradually go upward to the higher planets. So Krishna is not saying the mode of goodness gets you entrance into the spiritual world. It just gets you and it promotes you to the higher planetary systems. You're just getting a promotion, that's all. Those in the mode of passion live on the earthly planets, and those in the abominable mode of ignorance go down to the hellish worlds. So now the second degradation, if you're under the mode of ignorance, Krishna has first said, you may have to take on animal bodies, and now he's saying you have to go down to the places where conditions are even more hellish. When one properly sees that in all activities, no other performer is at work than these modes of nature, and he knows the Supreme Lord, who is transcendental to all these modes, he attains my spiritual nature. So now Krishna is coming to the portion where he says, how do you transcend these three modes? When you realize that these three modes are influencing you, when you realize that the highest purpose in life is to serve the Supreme Lord, then you can come onto the spiritual path. But the springboard for this is the Sattva Guna. And when you start practicing Bhakti Yoga, you then transcend eventually the three modes. When the embodied being is able to transcend these three modes associated with the material body, he can become free from birth, death, old age, and their distresses, and can enjoy nectar even in this life, which is what I was saying initially, that the word liberation has many layers of meanings. So if you're practicing spirituality, Krishna says not only you become, you acquire the same nature as me, but because you are acquiring the same nature as me, you find complete self-satisfaction while you're living in this middle planetary systems. But eventually you will be breaking free of this cycle and by entering the spiritual planets. So Arjuna asks a question. Oh, my dear Lord, by which symptoms is one known who is transcendental to these three modes? What is his behavior? And how does he transcend the modes of nature? This question Arjuna asked also in chapter 2, when he asked, what are the symptoms of a Sthita Prajna? You've spoken so much about Sthita Prajna. Can you tell me a little bit more? How do I recognize them? So now Arjuna is asking a similar question. Who are these people who are beyond the three modes? And actually, how do they transcend the three modes? What's the trick here? What's the secret? So what is his behavior? And how did he end up transcending the three modes? So the Lord is going to respond to Arjuna's question. So shlokas 22 to 25. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, O son of Pandu, he who does not hate elimination, attachment, and delusion when they are present or long for them when they disappear, who's unwavering and undisturbed through all these reactions of the material qualities, remaining neutral and transcendental, knowing that the modes alone are active. So we have to develop the quality. When your mind tells you do this, do that, the mind is giving you a lot of options. Some options in the mode of ignorance, some options in the mode of passion, some options in the mode of goodness. So if you're aware of how these modes are influencing you, you can become detached from the mind and not subject yourself to the whims of what your mind gives you as options constantly. So Krishna is saying someone who knows that the modes alone are active. So you don't have to respond to what your mind proposes to you. Who is situated in the self and regards alike happiness and distress. Who looks upon a lump of earth, a stone, and a piece of gold with an equal eye. Because he sees everything as the energy of the Lord. It's not that if he comes across a piece of gold, he gets super excited and say, whoopee, I won the lottery. So when he sees a lump of earth and a piece of gold, he immediately thinks, this is the Lord's property. Who's equal toward the desirable and the undesirable. Who is steady, situated equally well in praise and blame, honor and dishonor. So you don't get perturbed if people praise you, and similarly, you don't get too perturbed if people critique you. If they honor you or dishonor you, you don't worry. This is humility. Who treats alike both friend and enemy, and who has renounced all material activities. Such a person is said to have transcended the modes of nature. So anybody who's practicing Krishna consciousness has also renounced material activities, because we are trying our best to please Krishna, to please Guru, to please Vaishnavas. Such a person, Krishna says, has transcended the modes of nature. So have you noticed how much Lord Krishna focuses on our inner qualities? So self-realization does not come about without self-awareness. Self-awareness does not come about without self-discipline. So really, the entire Bhagavad Gita is about actually becoming a better person, but becoming a better human being first. But you can become a better human being the minute you connect back with Krishna. You don't have to independently try to acquire these qualities. These qualities get cultivated when you are in the association of Vaishnavas. They will automatically develop. One who engages in full devotional service. So now Krishna is coming back to the top of bhakti. In answer to the question that Arjuna asks, how did they transcend these three modes? Krishna has first answered the question, what is their behavior? What is their qualities? Now Krishna is answering the question, how did they achieve these qualities? One who engages in full devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, which means they don't give up practicing bhakti yoga. At once, Krishna is not saying sometime in the future, one day they will transcend. Krishna is saying the minute you have accepted me as your master and you begin to practice bhakti yoga, no matter how many imperfections you may have, in Krishna's opinion, you have immediately transcended the modes of material nature and thus comes to the level of Brahman. So in Krishna's eyes, the minute you take his shelter, he sees you as being perfect. He knows as long as you are exhibiting this determination and a little bit of faith, you are just getting rid of your anarthas over a period of time. He does not mind that at all. So you see, for bhakti yoga, there is no pre-qualification. Anybody can practice this. Whereas with other yogas, you have to first be a brahmachari, practice celibacy, come to the mode of goodness. Only then you can study Shastra. Only then you can practice Hatha Yoga. But for devotional service, there is no pre-qualification. Just practicing devotional service alone, Krishna says, immediately you've transcended the three modes of nature. And immediately you have come to the level of Brahman. Immediately. So have faith in the words of Krishna. Don't doubt Lord Krishna. And then Krishna concludes by saying, and I am the basis of the impersonal Brahman, which is immortal, imperishable, and eternal, and is the constitutional position of ultimate happiness. Ultimate happiness comes from understanding Paramatma and understanding your constitutional position. So your constitutional position is to serve. So we should figure out, how do we serve Krishna? How do we serve the devotees? How do we serve Guru? So some of these shlokas we have already read. So this is the three gunas competing with each other for prominence. Rajastamascha sattvam bhavati bharata, rajas sattvam tamaschaiva, tamas sattvam rajastatha. It's a combination of these three. So when goodness dominates, you are generally in a state of happiness, satisfaction. When passion dominates, you're always chasing things. Should I do this or should I do that? You're always anxious about what's the right thing to do or what's the right thing to do for you materially. When ignorance dominates, well, you're overeating and indulging your baser instincts. So, however, the same person can undergo all three gunas within a few hours, within a few minutes, within a day, and of course over a lifetime. So all of us will experience all three gunas. But in Krishna's mind, if you're practicing Krishna consciousness, even though you're still struggling with your anarthas, in his mind you have already transcended three gunas. You are already in the Shuddha Sattva state. Urdhvam gachanti sattvastha madhye tishtanti rajasa jaganyag guna vrittistha ado gachanti tamasa. So this is the destination for those who are under the influence of the three gunas. Upper planets for those predominantly under Sattvagun, the middle earthly planets for those predominantly under Rajagun, which means as long as you have material desires, you have to come back to the earthly planets. And lower planetary systems for those under the mode of ignorance. So if you're on the mode of passion, Krishna says you have unlimited desires and longings. You're always chasing something. You develop a great deal of attachment to objects and people in the mode of passion. You will work extremely hard just to get what you want, simply because your desire is driving you, your hankering is driving you. Whereas in the mode of goodness, you're free from sin, therefore you're happy and you're following the Vedic scriptures. But your destination is you're going to go to the higher planetary systems. So this is the shloka that is important for us on how we should actually transcend the three modes. Gunanetanatityatrın dehi deha samudbhavan janma mrityujjara dukkhair vimuktom mritamashnupe. So when the embodied being is able to transcend these three modes associated with the material body, he can become free from birth, death, old age, and their distresses, and can enjoy nectar even in this life. So what are the symptoms and what is his behavior and how do you actually transcend? Those were the concluding shlokas. So such a person is equipoised, he's neutral, he's free from hankering, he's free from envy. These are some of the good qualities that such a person, such a Mahatma exhibits. What is his behavior? Well, he's not disturbed by praise or blame, honor or dishonor, happiness or distress, desirable or undesirable things. He sees everyone and everything equally, material things and spiritual things. And he never acts whimsically. He surrenders to Krishna and he is very determined in his spiritual practices. What's the process? Mam chayo vyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samati tyaitan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. Bhakti yogena sevate. He engages in devotional activities. Mam chayo vyabhicharena. He offers all of this to me. Sagunan samatityaitan. Like this, he transcends the three modes of material nature and he gets situated in Brahman realization. He is self-satisfied. He becomes self-realized. So this is the actual process. So the acronym for today was TRAP, and the single word summary for today is bars, the three prison bars. And Krishna, as your attorney, as your advocate, is advising you that these are the three problems for you. This is what is keeping you in this jail. And he's telling you how to get out of this jail. One of the first things to get out of this jail is to overcome the influence of these three gunas. How can you overcome the influence of these three gunas? Well, simply by becoming Krishna's devotee. So tomorrow's chapter, which is called Purushottama Yoga, again, it's a short chapter. The English translation of the chapter is the Yoga of the Supreme Person. So tomorrow, so let us say you've gotten out of the prison, you have overcome these three modes of material nature, but you still need to get out of this Prakriti. What is the process by which you can get out of this prison besides practicing devotional service? Let us say you're not ready to practice devotional service. Then Krishna is going to tell you, what else can you do to overcome the influence of these three modes? So that we will discover tomorrow. Vancha kalpadarupyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Ananta koti vaishnava vrinda ki jai. Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srila Gurudev ki jai.